Okay, so yesterday we were talking about the plumber case, where you haven't arrived at a price when he first comes, and there's been no stipulation, and then when he gives you the bill, you get sticker shock, and the question is there an isser of baltolian if you don't pay him the full amount and you say you want to check it out? So Rav Stern's conclusion was you do have a right to say that I was not anticipating paying that amount, and you have a right to tell him to wait until you verify the price, the fair price. Okay, so that was the first thing. Now we're going to go to another case, which is on the following page. We're on Reish Mem Dalid, Schir Lasha'a. The context of this halacha was that if a person is paid by the hour and he finishes, let's say, X number of hours, as long as he finishes before Shkia, you have to pay him before nightfall. Now, again, usually employers don't work that way. They usually pay you at the end of the week or at the end of a 2-week period or at the end of the month. But this is all contracted with the laborer well in advance. We're talking here about an informal, you hire a guy, you pick him up at Home Depot and you say, I need some work. That's what we typically did in LA, is if you needed a job done, there were migrant workers, and they would be waiting at Home Depot if someone needed a job. That's not really the way it's supposed to be done, because there are labor laws in every country, and the labor laws clearly define how you're supposed to pay your worker. But when nothing has been stipulated, this is the Torah law kicks in. Now, let's look at the next case in the Biurim. Misha hizmin rechev l'nesiya, haloch v'chozer, v'chazor, v'tosev hes hamtana shel sha'a v'chayotze bo. A guy hires a driver. He says, I want you to take me to so-and-so. I want you to take me from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv. I want you to wait for me for an hour. I'm going to go to my appointment, and then I want you to drive me back to Yerushalayim. Okay? Ubizman ha'hamtana kibel hanahag nesiya im adam acher. And during the interim period, while he's waiting for me, at my appointment, he figures he might as well, why waste my time? Let me do some driving in Tel Aviv and pick up another guy. Ba'ofen shekasher hanoseya harishon yitztarech linsoa. So he's not in any way compromising the service to his original customer. The original customer, he's going to charge, let's say, $100 in order to take him round trip from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv and back, plus wait for him for an hour while he guys got his appointment. He figures during the hour, I can pick up some local traffic, do some drives, and make a little extra cash. Haim chayav hanahag levater o lahozil al kol panim lemazmin harishon et hamachir avor hahamtana olo. So the question now is, does the driver have to give a discount to the original customer? Because since I'm charging you for my time and my driving, that time that I'm charging you for, that hour of waiting, I'm actually using productively for other customers. So am I ethically and halachically obligated? Watch your step. Am I ethically or halachically obligated to give a refund or a discount to the original customer? It seems to me, Rav Stern says that no, the driver is not obligated to offer any kind of discount. And what's the reason? V'hatam dekevin shuhu mitzido mizuman b'li'ikov bisman shekava im harishon. He says because the driver has set aside a block of time for his original customer. Leficha kol harevach shenizdamen lo bintayim shayach lo. And therefore, if he has any downtime and is able to make profit from some other revenue stream, during the time that he's blocked off for his first customer, then he has every right to keep it for himself. And as you know, provided that again, he's not compromising on the service that he's providing for the original customer. Well, the havamina is I paid you for, let's say, 3 hours of labor. Yeah, so maybe I have a right to tell you, I want you just waiting for me on the street. I want you waiting for me on the curb because I'm insecure. I don't want you to move anywhere. So the answer is you don't have a right to say that. As long as I'm providing you with the service that you need, you're going to take at least an hour, you told me. So during that hour that I'm waiting for you, I'm going to go enterprise and play poker or pick up other drivers. He says, we paskin that whatever a worker finds, let's say a worker finds a lost object which doesn't have any simanim. So even though I'm working for somebody else during the day, I'm still allowed to keep the objects that I find that are hefker for myself, even though during the time that I'm under someone else's employ, really everything that I generate belongs to the employer. And the reason is because I'm not your slave. Normally we say mashakana evet kana rabo. Anything that a slave picks up and acquires, he acquires for the master. But an employee is not a slave. An employee gets to keep the things that he finds. Uvenasivas hamishpat kasav, daha dekaimelan daha moshiv chavero b'chanut, v'halachu machar mima'osav, v'tzarach liten chatzi harevech labal hachanut. He says, but there is a conflicting halacha. The Nesivus writes that if I go to someone's store and I sell their retail items, and unbeknownst to the store owner, I'm at the cash register, right? I'm the guy who sees the customers and sells them the wares of the store. And unbeknownst to the store owner, I bring some of my own tchotchkes to the store and I sell those as well. So the halacha is that I have to give half of the profit to the store owner. And so the Nesiva says, he says that's because the employment arrangement is that the guy has to sell and deal in everything that the storekeeper gives him to sell. B'dami l'socher shesachor l'laket mitzios shel dagim u'matza mitzia acheres dahavi shel ba'olim. So, for example, if I hire you to go out on the beach and to find fish, and then you end up, or I send you out to the lake and I say, I want you to fish for me. And in the course of your fishing, you reel in a watch, then you have to surrender the watch to the person that hired you. Because in that situation, anything, I hired you to catch stuff for me. And similarly, I hired you to sell stuff for me if you're at the cash register. He says, and the reality is that in a situation where I'm at the cash register to sell widgets for you, and that's the only thing that you told me to sell, because that's the only thing in your store that's for sale, and I set up a side business of selling doodads instead of widgets, right? Or let's say I'm working at a plumbing supply store, and then all of a sudden I take out a big box of chocolate bars and I put them on the counter, and I let people buy the chocolate bars, and they cost me 25 cents, and I charge $1, right? And so I set up a little side business. So halachically, afsha asr lasus kain lechatchila. I'm not allowed to do that without permission of the store owner. But nevertheless, mikol makom keven she'en yado mechuyev lasok be'isek hazeh lebalabayis lo havi yado ki yad habalabayis litin lo chatzi arevach ad kan devar avayin sham. In that situation, even though I was wrong in not asking permission to put out a box of chocolate bars on the counter, but in that situation, I'm not obligated to surrender half the profits to the balabayas. What's the difference? He says the difference is because I was not hired to do just general sales. I was hired to sell plumbing supplies. So you set me up to sell plumbing supplies at your plumbing supply store. I figured I'll be an enterprising young entrepreneur and I'll put out a box of chocolate bars there because who knows, the guys who are plumbers may get hungry over the course of the day, so I'll sell them chocolate bars. So lechatchila, it's usher for me to do that. I have to ask permission from the store owner in order to sell anything else out of his store. But if I do that, I'm not mechuyev to surrender any of the profits to him. Ulefiza nira dehu adin hacha, and therefore it would seem that that's more applicable to the situation over here. Hoil v'huska mitchila shesha echas yeh begeder hamtana v'lo yasok avur balabayis. He says because in this situation the driver was told up front, you're just going to be waiting for that 1 hour that I'm in my appointment, and you're not going to be. I'm not hiring you to do other things other than wait during that period of time. Al kain mashin izdamilo ezer revach havishalo bilvad. And therefore, if I can use that time more enterprisingly and figure out how to make money during that waiting time, then I get to keep everything. Below dami laha de kaimelan besimin shin lamed gimel dehecha shetzarach litain lepoyel scharo kepoyel bato the matza hapoel lios niskar b'makom acher de pater balabayis. He says, and it's also not analogous to another halacha. Let's say I'm mechuyev to pay a worker like a poel batel. In other words, I hired a person for a certain number of days, and then it turns out that I don't need him for the job. There are situations that we've learned already that because this guy has given up other work, I still have to pay him. But I don't have to pay him what I would normally pay a person for the very strenuous labor that he normally would have done. Here, he doesn't have to work at all. So what do I have to give him? I have to give him a wage that would be commensurate to what the guy would be willing to take for not having to do strenuous work and to stay at home. But that is something that's maybe, let's say, a 20% discount of what he would normally charge, or whatever number the Chachamim would arrive at. But in that situation, you have to pay someone like a poel batel. In that situation, the halacha states that let's say the guy is able to find other work. So then the balabayas doesn't have to pay him anymore like a poel batel. He says the vaday shiny hasam the chol mashin is chayv lepoel hainu mishum shigarim lo hefsid shaharei sachar lemalachta. He says because the reason why the balabayas is chayv in that situation is because you set aside time to work for me, and then it turned out that I couldn't give you the work. So I've caused you a financial loss, you the employee, you the worker, and therefore I have to make you whole by paying you for the days that I made you set aside for me. The ilav hachi because you could have worked for somebody else during that time, and that's why I have to pay you. And that's why the poskim say in that situation, if the worker is able to find other work, then it turns out that the guy who asked him to set aside the days didn't cause him financial loss, okay, because he is able to find other work. He says, first of all, we have to establish that I hired a guy, I'm going to pay him $100 for 3 hours, an hour to Tel Aviv, an hour of waiting at my appointment, and an hour back from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim. He says, granted, the hour of waiting is only a portion of that $100. Efshir dehu banui al kein svarazu shel schar batala. But the reason why you have to pay me the full $100 and not less is because I could have used that hour constructively. V'imkein hayam makom lomar dim ovad memela eza avoda acheres v'lo nitbatel. Imkein ein tzarich l'shalem avor hamtana. So therefore, there is an argument to be made that if I'm able to find work during that hour of waiting, that maybe I have to give that discount. I have to pass on that discount to the original guy who hired me, because the reason why I'm charging him so much money is because he's making me give up other work. But if I can find other work in the interim, maybe I do have to give him a discount. Shuhurak begeder schar b'teila, aval be'emes nirish ze'eno. But Rav Stern says that's the incorrect way of thinking about the scenario. Mishum tikashir adam mazmin rechev u'misachamim al mechir mesuyam. He says because when a person hires a driver and they agree on a fixed price, in yanzeh kolel hakol kechavila echat. He says it's a package deal. It's a package deal that when I hire you for that $100 to do that 3-hour job, that's an all-in price. The hanasiyah, the hahamtana yachdav. It includes the driving and it includes the waiting. And that's the reason why we say that during that period, while I am employed by you, anything that I can find that can make me more money, it's like finding a lost object during the time that I'm working for you, I'm allowed to keep. He says, and therefore, the time that I'm waiting in the car while you're at your appointment is no different from if I'm working with my hands, digging or schlepping. He says, just because let's say I'm not digging at a particular moment because there's no way I'm not able to dig, you still have to pay me for the time that you hired me to dig. And it would seem to me that that's also standard convention. In other words, besides the svara that I'm giving you, that the employer has to still pay the full amount, even though the driver was able to make money during that hour of waiting, it seems like that's the convention as well. In other words, I don't have a right to tell the driver, wait here. Driver could say, well, I'm just going to go get some lunch, and if he decides during his lunch hour that he's going to go and pick up other drivers and do an Uber around Tel Aviv, he has every right to do so. Okay? Make sense?
Somewhat of an extrapolation of this concept. Sometimes,
Severance.
But then there's always the clause that should they find work
In the interim. Well, what Lloyd is asking is about severance. A severance package is a little bit different from what we're talking about over here. But severance is a bonus for working all those years. So Lloyd says, what happens if a guy was working for 10 years? He's entitled to 10-week severance, let's say, or 10 months severance. I don't know however it is. 10 months severance, let's say. So if a guy is entitled to severance, that's different. It all depends on the structure of the severance, because based on anything that we've seen up until now, he's no longer under the employ of the employer. It's a bonus. It's a bonus to compensate him in consideration of his loyalty to the employer. Okay, I mean, however you define it, but it's not a quid pro quo for services being rendered during those 10 months. So, right? So the law may be built into that law could be that in the event that you find other work and you're gainfully employed during the period of severance, you forfeit the remainder of your severance. If that's the law, that's the law. I don't know or if there's a contract between the two parties and that's clearly stipulated. So then that's clearly stipulated. What would happen?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What would happen, for example, if the person who hires the driver says, I'm hiring you for 3 hours, but I don't want you to take a lunch break. I am an insecure individual, or I want people to see my status. So we're going to take the limo, and I want the limo to wait on the street in front of the clinic.
That was exactly my question.
Okay.
That's what I was going to ask.
So does an employer have a right to make that demand? Sure. Whatever is contracted originally, he has a right to do. Now, just like we saw before, that there's a halacha that if I'm hired to act as the cashier at a store and I decide I'm going to put out a box of chocolate bars, I'm allowed to keep the profit, but lechatchila it's usher for me to do so. Why? Because when I go into someone else's store, I don't have a right to just decide to sell whatever I want in that person's workplace. I'm not allowed to, presumably that's the issue. I'm not allowed to just do whatever I want if it's someone else's time for me to work for them. He may not want to sell chocolate bars. He may feel that the plumbers are fat enough and they don't, on moral grounds, I shouldn't be selling plumbers chocolate bars or whatever it is. So he has a right to make those demands. I believe that as long as it would be agreed upon in advance, then you could contract with the driver whatever you want. If, however, they get to Tel Aviv and they stop off at the clinic, and the guy says, "Okay, now wait here the whole time," and the guy says, "Well, I'd like to go and get myself some lunch." I don't think at that point the employer has a right to say, "No, you must stay here. That wasn't what we contracted. You didn't tell me in advance that I couldn't move the car. Why shouldn't I be allowed to get myself some lunch if I'm waiting here for an hour?" Okay. If the guy gives a good reason and he says, "I don't know how long it's going to take. I have to make sure that someone's there. If no one's there, it might only be 5 minutes, and I don't want to have to wait for you to another half hour by the time you get coming back." So then that's something else, right? Okay.
What would happen, Rabbi, if the person does do these odd jobs in the hour, but because he got stuck in traffic, he's late, and so he's left his original client waiting?
I think that then the employer has a valid taina that he's entitled to some kind of discount for having been forced to wait. You've inconvenienced me. Why should I pay you the full amount?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. The employer would say, "I needed to get back to Yerushalayim by 5 p.m. and because of you, I'm not getting back until 6 p.m. Right? Look, you've put my whole schedule out of whack because you decided to get another job in the hour." Okay.
Rabbi, one other scenario, going back to the sort of thing of the employees selling the chocolate bars in let's say in the plumbing store. What happens if I keep on the plumbing theme here? Let's say I hire a plumber to come to my office to fix something through a company, and while talking to the plumber, I find he does something else, and I contract with him to do something at my home.
Yeah.
Separately from the company. So I'm now making a situation with him.
Yeah. Well, I don't. Yeah. So what is the shaila?
Because I'm possibly, especially if I would be doing like some sort of a plumbing job with him, separate from the company.
Right. But is it during company hours, or am I stealing him away from his employer because he's gonna quit his employer? Let's say he says, I have a side business that I work for a company that does commercial plumbing for commercial properties. But by the way, I also do, residential plumbing on the side. Not for this employer, but I do it on the side. So the example that you gave, I don't see really so much as a shaila. I see it more as a conflict of interest. If, let's say, a guy is hired by like this happens a lot also. A guy is hired as a barber by a salon, and they pay him a salary. And then he whispers in my ear while I'm sitting in the salon, if you come into my house, instead of charging you $30 for a haircut, I'll only charge you $20 for a haircut. So since I don't have to pay the salon the rental for the haircut. That I think is a breach of ethics, because that's actually stealing business away from the salon. But in the case that you illustrated, Ron, you'd have to make the case that by my contracting with him to come to my house, I'm stealing him away from his employer. So you'd have to create that kind of scenario where it would be not only unethical, but perhaps halachically prohibited. Okay. Okay. So maybe we'll hold it here for today, since we're about to start a new SIF. We're all caught up. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Yep, it's quite Rabbi. Thank you very much.
That was an interesting case today.
It was an interesting case. Yeah, because you could almost see it going the other way, because it just seems like I'm paying you for a period of time and you're making money. I should get a share of that. But I guess
It all
I don't know whether, like, I mean,
all different shades of that, right?
Yeah, because I can imagine if he said something like, come back in an hour, but I'm expected to come back in an hour to go somewhere else. But I could be quicker, so stick around because I might be out in 40 minutes.
That's
like,
right.
I mean, there are, if you specify in the contract that you've hired him for the full day and he should be available to you, then I guess he can't do other things.
That's right.
It's only because it was unspoken and he said, I want you here 1 hour from now, then that hour is free to him.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.